The reception hall glittered with white orchids and forced smiles. Damian sat alone at the back table, watching Elena dance with another man. Then two small boys ran past his chair, and one paused, just for a second, turning his head the exact same way someone Damian used to know once did. Who were they? Before we begin, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. And if you're new to the channel, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Damian wasn't supposed to be here. He had told himself that 3 times on the drive over, twice in the parking lot, and once more at the door. But here he was, jacket pressed, expression neutral, slipping into the back row just as the music swelled and the doors opened. He didn't come for closure. He told himself that too. Elena appeared at the end of the aisle in white, her hair pinned back the way she used to wear it on quiet Sunday mornings. She didn't look at him. Not once. Not even a flicker of recognition toward the back of the room where he sat perfectly still, hands folded on his knees like a man waiting for a train he already knew he'd missed. Damian watched her take another man's hand and felt nothing he could name. That was the worst part. Not the sharp pain he'd braced for. Just a slow, quiet weight settling somewhere in his chest, the kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that stays. He was already thinking about leaving when the boys appeared. 2 of them. Identical. Maybe 7 years old, both in small white dress shirts that had already come untucked. They were chasing each other around the cake table with the specific, unstoppable energy of children who had been told to behave and had decided not to. One knocked a napkin off a chair. Neither noticed. Damian almost smiled. Almost. Then Marcus, his assistant, leaned close and said quietly, "They're hers." Damian looked at him. "What? The boys?" Marcus kept his eyes forward. "They came with her." That was all he said. And something about the way he said it, no names, no explanation, no further detail offered, made Damian turn back to look at them again. Really look. 2 boys. Elena's boys. He had never heard her mention children. Not once. Not in their years of marriage, not in the ugly silence that followed, not in the single, formal message exchanged through lawyers when everything was finally, officially over. Where had they come from? The reception moved the way receptions do, toasts, laughter, the clink of glasses, someone crying near the floral arrangements. Damian stayed in his chair. He accepted a glass of water he didn't drink. He watched. The boys were still running. The smaller of the 2 tripped, caught himself on a tablecloth, looked around to see if anyone noticed, then burst out laughing when his brother pointed at him. Normal. Completely normal. Damian was just about to look away when it happened. The first boy stopped running. Not because someone called him. Not because he tripped. He just stopped, mid-stride, and turned his head slowly toward the back of the room. Toward Damian. He tilted it slightly to the left. A small, quiet gesture. The kind a person makes when something is familiar but they can't place why. Damian felt the air leave his lungs. He knew that tilt. He had seen it 10,000 times and never expected to see it again. It belonged to someone else. Someone no longer here. The connection formed somewhere below thought, somewhere instinct lives, and it made no sense, so he pushed it away. You're imagining things. But he couldn't look away. The boy stared at him for another moment, curious, not afraid, then turned and ran after his brother. Just like that. Gone. Like it meant nothing. It meant nothing. It means nothing. Damian's hand was flat on the table. He hadn't realized he'd moved it. Marcus glanced at him once but said nothing. Across the room, Elena was laughing at something her new husband whispered to her. She looked lighter than Damian remembered. Or maybe she looked like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had simply learned to carry it without showing the weight. He was still watching her when the wedding photographer crouched near the cake table, waving a hand to get the boys' attention. "Come on," the photographer said cheerfully, gesturing toward the frame. "Come stand here. Leo, look this way." The boy turned. The first boy. The one who had stopped and tilted his head. He turned at the name like it was his, because it was. Leo. Damian had never heard Elena use that name. Not once. Not in any conversation, any message, any small detail she had ever shared. The name meant nothing to him. And yet something in his stomach went cold and still. Because he had heard that name before. Not from Elena. From someone else, in a completely different life, spoken quietly in a conversation he was never meant to overhear. He just couldn't remember where. Damian didn't sleep that night. He sat in his hotel room with the lights off and the city blinking quietly outside the window, and he kept seeing the same thing, a small boy tilting his head, a photographer saying a name, and the cold, specific feeling that followed. Not fear exactly. Something older than fear. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself that 3 times before he stopped believing it. 5 years ago, his marriage didn't end in a fight. That was the part nobody understood. There was no screaming, no broken dishes, no dramatic moment he could point to and say, that's where it fell apart. It happened in silence. He was traveling, Hong Kong, then Dubai, then back to New York before the month was out. Long trips. The kind that felt necessary at the time and look very different in hindsight. He would call. Elena would answer. They would talk for a few minutes about nothing important, and then one of them would say they had to go, and neither of them would argue about it. That was the marriage at the end. Two people being polite to each other across a very large distance. When he came home that October, her side of the closet was empty. No note. No call. Her lawyer contacted his within the week. Clean, fast, final. Like she had been planning it while he was gone, timing it carefully, waiting for the right moment when he wouldn't be there to ask questions. He had asked himself for years what he missed. What signal he ignored. What conversation he had been too busy to have. He never found a satisfying answer. His sister Camille called him the morning after the wedding, which meant someone had seen him there and told her. I heard you went, she said. No greeting. I was invited. Damian. A pause. The kind that means don't make me say the obvious thing out loud. Leave it alone. I'm not doing anything. I know that tone. You're already doing something. She exhaled slowly. She moved on. She built something. Whatever you're looking for at that wedding, it's not there. He didn't answer right away. Outside, a car horn sounded far below on the street. She had children, he said. 2 boys. Nobody ever mentioned that. The silence on Camille's end lasted just a beat too long. People don't owe you updates on their lives after a divorce. I'm not saying they do. He kept his voice even. I'm just saying no one mentioned it. Not once. In 5 years. Another pause. Smaller this time, but he caught it. Reopen old wounds and they bleed, Damian. That's all. Just, let it be. She hung up before he could ask why her voice had gone careful in the way it does when someone is choosing their words very deliberately. He found out about the rumor from Marcus, who had heard it from someone at the wedding, a distant family friend, the kind who collects other people's unfinished stories. Apparently, there had been talk at the time of the divorce. Quiet talk, the kind passed in low voices at family dinners when the subject of the conversation wasn't in the room. Some people said Elena had already been pregnant when she left. That she had known, and said nothing, and gone. Damian sat with that for a long moment. He hadn't heard it then. He had been too far away, moving too fast, and by the time he might have asked the right questions, Elena had already disappeared behind the wall of legal paperwork and professional silence. The rumor never reached him. Or someone made sure it didn't. He didn't know what to do with the thought, so he set it aside. Not because it didn't matter. Because it mattered too much to look at directly. He went back to the venue that afternoon, not for any reason he could explain, just to retrieve a jacket Marcus said he'd left at the coat check. A small errand. An excuse. The venue was nearly empty. Staff moved through the space folding tablecloths and collecting forgotten centerpieces. The white orchids were already wilting in the afternoon heat. He was almost at the door when he heard them. The boys were in the garden just outside, chasing something, a butterfly, maybe, or just each other. Their voices carried easily through the open glass doors. And beside them, sitting on a low stone bench and watching them with the tired patience of someone who had done this many times before, was a woman in her 50s. Their nanny, he guessed from her posture. Someone comfortable in the role. One of the boys ran close to her and she caught him gently, straightening his collar with the practiced ease of someone used to doing it 20 times a day. Then Leo pulled away laughing and ran back toward his brother, and the woman watched him go with an expression Damian couldn't fully see from where he stood. Look at you, she said quietly, mostly to herself. Soft. Like she was talking to the air, not to either boy. Your father would be so proud. Damian went still. The other woman standing nearby, a young staff member collecting forgotten napkins from the garden chairs, didn't react. Didn't correct her. Didn't even look up. No one said, he doesn't have a father. No one said, what do you mean? No one filled the silence that followed with any explanation at all. The nanny simply watched the boys run, her expression full of something warm and old and certain. And in the garden, Leo laughed, loud and bright and completely unaware, while Damian stood at the glass door and felt the ground beneath his certainty shift just slightly. Their father would be so proud. Who was she talking about? The wedding photos arrived in a box that still smelled like the old house. Damian hadn't asked for all of them. He'd told his assistant to pull whatever was in storage from the last decade, family gatherings, holidays, anything with faces. He told himself it was just nostalgia. He was a good liar. He spread the photos across his office desk, one by one. Birthday parties. A Christmas dinner. His mother's 70th. He wasn't looking for anything specific. He didn't have a theory yet. He just had a feeling, the kind that sits in your chest and won't leave until you feed it. He stopped at a photo from 7 years ago. His brother Julian, laughing at something off camera. His own face, younger, unguarded. Elena beside him, her hand in his. He put that one face down. He kept looking. He went back to the wedding reception the next morning. Not physically. But in his mind, he kept returning to that single moment, the boy stopping mid-run, tilting his head. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It wasn't even unusual for a child. But something about the angle, the stillness, the way the boy paused before doing anything else, it pulled at something Damian couldn't identify. He'd seen that pause before. He was certain of it. He just couldn't remember where. His driver, Marcus, had been with him for 11 years. When Damian climbed into the car that afternoon, he asked it casually, the way you mentioned the weather. The boys at the reception yesterday. Do you know when they came into Elena's life? Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror. The twins? They weren't around until maybe last year, sir. I drove Mrs. Vasquez, Elena, to a few family events the year before. No children with her then. Then suddenly, last spring, both boys were just there. No explanation? No one asked me to provide one. Damian nodded slowly. Last spring. Not 5 years ago. Not when Elena disappeared. Last spring. That didn't fit his theory. But he filed it away. He returned to the wedding venue that afternoon under the excuse of collecting something Elena had left behind, a small gift bag that belonged to his mother. He didn't need it urgently. He needed a reason to be there. The boys were in the garden with a young woman he assumed was their nanny. The quieter one sat on a bench, watching a butterfly land on the railing. The louder one chased it. Normal. Ordinary. 2 7-year-old boys with nothing to hide. Then the quiet one noticed Damian across the garden. He didn't wave this time. He just looked. And then, before he turned back to the butterfly, he paused, that same pause, like he was choosing his next move before making it. Damian stood completely still. He'd seen that before. He knew that. Not from Elena. Not from anyone at this wedding. He just couldn't name it yet. Inside, collecting the gift bag, he crossed paths with a woman named Petra, a distant cousin of Elena's who'd always talked too freely at events like this. Strange to see you here, she said, not unkindly. After everything. Elena and I are civil, Damian said. Petra nodded, then lowered her voice the way people do when they want to seem reluctant to gossip. Those boys are sweet, aren't they? A little sudden, if you ask me. Nobody in the family knew about them until recently. Elena just introduced them one day. Said they were family. Nobody pressed. No one asked questions? Petra shrugged. You don't ask Elena questions. You know how she is. He did know. That was the problem. Back in his car, Damian called his lawyer. Hypothetically, he said, which was how he always began questions he didn't want answered hypothetically. If a child's parental records were changed, amended, sealed, transferred, what would that process look like? How difficult would it be to trace? His lawyer was quiet for a moment. Depends on the jurisdiction. Depends on who filed. If the original records were sealed by a court order, they're very difficult to access without cause. Why? I'm just thinking through something. Damian. His lawyer's voice shifted. Be careful with whatever you're thinking through. He ended the call. Outside the window, the city moved the way it always did, indifferent, continuous, unbothered by the quiet collapse happening inside one man's chest. He pressed 2 fingers against his mouth and stared at nothing. The boys weren't around until last spring. But they were 7 years old. That meant they existed somewhere for 6 years before anyone in this family acknowledged them. 6 years of silence. Where had they been? He almost missed it. He'd picked up Elena's coat himself, it was draped over a chair near the venue's entrance, left behind along with the gift bag. He was handing it to her new husband when something slipped from the inside pocket. A folded piece of paper, white, slightly worn at the edges like it had been opened and refolded many times. He caught it before it hit the floor. He shouldn't have looked. He told himself that even as he looked. It was a legal document. Or part of one, just a single page, folded in thirds. Most of the text was too small to read in the dim light. But the header was clear. And in the top right corner, stamped in faded ink above a case number he didn't recognize. Voss family. His family name. Damian stood there holding a piece of paper that had been folded and unfolded so many times it was nearly falling apart at the creases, a document Elena had been carrying close enough to her body that it lived in her coat pocket. A legal document. With his name on it. He set it down before anyone could see his hands. Damian didn't sleep. He lay in the dark with the image of that document replaying in his mind, his family name, stamped on a page that had been folded and unfolded so many times it was nearly falling apart. Elena had been carrying it. Not in a bag. Not in a folder. In her coat pocket, where you keep things you reach for without thinking. He needed to talk to her. Not through lawyers. Not through silence. Directly. He called her in the morning. They met at a cafe near the venue. Neutral ground. Elena arrived first, which surprised him. She was already sitting with a coffee she hadn't touched when he walked in. I found the document, he said, before he'd even sat down. No small talk. No weather. Elena didn't flinch. She wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at the table. You went through my coat. It fell out. I picked it up. Damian. It had my family name on it. He kept his voice low. Steady. My name, Elena. On a document you've been carrying around in your pocket. I'm not going to pretend I didn't see that. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, You're reading things into something you don't understand. That was not a denial. He noticed. Then explain it to me. I can't. Can't, or won't. She finally looked up. Her expression wasn't cold exactly. It was the face of someone holding something very heavy, trying not to let you see how much it weighs. Both, she said quietly. And then she stood, left money on the table, and walked out. He sat there alone with her untouched coffee going cold. He hadn't expected a confession. But he also hadn't expected the particular way she'd refused, not defensive, not angry. Careful. The way you speak around something breakable. He sent the photo to his mother that afternoon. Just a casual text, ran into Elena at an event, her boys were there, with a picture he'd taken at the reception, the twins mid-run near the garden. He framed it as nothing. Just sharing. His mother called back within 2 minutes. Where did you get this? I told you, the reception. Elena's boys. Silence. Then, they look healthy. That was all she said. But her voice had changed, tightened, like she'd pulled something closed inside herself. Mom. Do you know who they are? They're Elena's boys, you just said. A pause. I have to go, sweetheart. The neighbor is at the door. She hung up. Damian stared at his phone. His mother had raised 2 boys. She knew what a child looked like when it reminded her of someone. She'd just looked at those twins and gone completely quiet, and then invented a neighbor at the door to end the call. Something in his chest shifted. He drove to the venue again that afternoon. He had no real excuse this time. He just went. Elena's new husband, a broad man named Thomas who carried himself with the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed, was standing near the entrance when Damian arrived. He watched Damian cross the garden without saying anything. Just watched. The way a person watches when they've been watching for a while. The boys were near the fountain. The louder one was throwing coins in. The quieter one was sitting on the edge, doing that thing again, that pause, that stillness before movement, and Damian found himself slowing down without meaning to. Then the quiet boy looked up and said, completely without ceremony, Were you sad at the wedding too? Damian stopped. What? The boy shrugged. You were sitting in the back by yourself. My mom was crying a little but she didn't want anyone to see. I saw. He looked back at the fountain. I thought maybe you were sad too. Damian crouched down to the boy's level. His voice, when it came, was quieter than he intended. What's your name? Nico. Nico. He said it once, like he was testing the weight of it. I wasn't sad. I was just thinking. Nico considered this with the seriousness only a 7-year-old can give a stranger's answer. Okay, he said. Then he went back to watching the coins sink. Damian stood up slowly. An adult confrontation could be navigated. Deflected. Managed. But a child who noticed everything and asked the simple, direct question that every adult in the room had been too careful to ask, that landed somewhere undefended. His mother had gone quiet. Elena had refused to answer. And Nico had just walked straight through every wall Damian had built, with 4 words and a shrug. Thomas appeared at his shoulder without warning. Mr. Voss. Not unfriendly. Not friendly either. I think it's time to head out. I know what you were doing. Thomas kept his voice low, his eyes steady. I've watched you come back 3 times in 2 days. I'm not going to make a scene. But these are my sons now. And I'd appreciate it if you'd remember that. My sons now. Damian held the man's gaze for a moment, then nodded once and walked away. He found Elena near the entrance, speaking to a florist about leftover arrangements. When the florist stepped away, Damian moved in. You should stop, she said, before he could speak. I can't. Damian. She turned to face him fully. Her voice dropped. Some truths cost more than they're worth. I mean that. Whatever you think you're close to finding, I need you to ask yourself if you're ready to live with it. Are you threatening me? No. She looked genuinely tired. I'm protecting you. I've been protecting you for 5 years. I just need you to let me keep doing it. She walked away before he could answer. Protecting him. From what? From whom? From a truth she'd been carrying alone in her coat pocket? His phone rang as he reached his car. Private investigator. He'd hired the man 3 days ago and hadn't expected results this quickly. I found something, the investigator said. No greeting. Tell me. It's partial. The full file is sealed tight, court order, 5 years old. But I got the filing type and the approximate date. A pause. Damian. It's an adoption record. Filed 5 years ago. Both boys, same filing. Whose names are on it? That's the problem. The biological parent section is sealed behind the main order. I can't get to it without a judge. Another pause, heavier this time. But I can tell you one thing I could pull. The filing was flagged with a secondary family reference. The family name on the flag? Damian already knew. Somehow, he already knew. Voss, the investigator said. The investigator's second call came at 6 in the morning. Damian was already awake. He'd been awake for most of the night, sitting at his desk with the sealed adoption filing number written on a piece of paper in front of him, just the number, because that was all he had. A number and a family name. I got deeper into the secondary reference, the investigator said. No greeting, same as before. The Voss flag on the filing, it's not just a family connection. It's a direct biological listing. Damian went very still. Say that again. Whoever filed the adoption listed a biological parent from the Voss family. I can't pull the full name, the sealing order covers that. But the biological parent isn't marked as deceased. They're listed as living. And they're listed as male. The room felt smaller. You're telling me, Damian said slowly, that a Voss man is the biological father of those boys. That's what the partial record suggests. Damian set the phone down on the desk without ending the call. He sat there for a full minute. Then he picked it up again. Send me everything you have. He read it 3 times. Each time, the same conclusion formed. Elena had left him 5 years ago without explanation. She'd been pregnant, or become pregnant shortly after, and she'd hidden it. She'd built a wall of silence around 2 children who carried his family's blood. And she'd stood in front of him at that cafe and told him she was protecting him. From what? From knowing he had sons? He thought about every cold look she'd given him at the wedding. Every deflection. Every carefully chosen non-answer. He'd been reading it as guilt. Now he read it as calculation. The grief he'd carried for 5 years, the quiet, shapeless grief of a marriage that ended without a reason, curdled into something harder. She hadn't left him. She'd taken something from him. He drove to her house that evening. He didn't call ahead. Thomas answered the door, saw Damian's face, and said, "Now isn't a good time. I need 5 minutes with Elena." I said, "Thomas." Elena's voice came from somewhere behind him. A pause. "It's okay. Let him in." They stood in the hallway. Thomas stayed close, not aggressive, but present. Elena looked at Damian the way you look at something you knew was coming and couldn't stop. "I know," Damian said. She didn't move. "The adoption filing. The biological listing. I know the boys are mine, Elena." His voice was controlled. "Barely. I don't know why you did it. I don't know if it was anger, or revenge, or something I'll never understand. But I know." Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You don't understand what you're asking." "I'm not asking anything. I'm telling you what I found. Damian. They're my sons." The words came out like something breaking. "They're my sons and I've lost 7 years." She didn't deny it. That was what broke him open. Not a confession. Not an explanation. Just silence, and her eyes, not angry, not defensive. Tired. Devastated. Like someone watching a car accident they couldn't stop from across the street. "You don't understand," she said again. Softer this time. Thomas put his hand on her shoulder and looked at Damian. "I think you should go." He called his mother from the car. "I know about the boys," he said. "I know they're mine. And I need to know if you already knew." His mother was quiet for so long he thought the call had dropped. "Mom." "Damian." Her voice was careful. "What exactly did your investigator tell you?" "Enough." Another silence. Then, "Come for dinner tomorrow. Don't do anything tonight. I'm going to fight for custody." "Damian. They're my sons. I've missed 7 years. I'm not going to let that become 8. He ended the call. Word moved through the family the way it always did, quietly, then all at once. He hadn't meant to tell anyone beyond his mother. But by the next morning, his sister had called. By afternoon, his cousin. Each conversation slightly different, but carrying the same current underneath. We always wondered. We suspected. We're glad you finally know. His mother's house, when he arrived for dinner, felt changed. His aunt was there, which was unusual. His mother had cooked more than two people needed, which meant she'd been expecting a larger conversation. They didn't say it directly. They never did in this family. But they began to treat him differently. His aunt asked about the boys with a warmth she hadn't used the day before. His mother watched him across the dinner table with an expression that was one part relief and two parts something he couldn't name. He was being folded back into a narrative. The father who didn't know. The truth that finally came out. It felt like justice. It felt like the 5 years of emptiness finally having a shape. He let himself believe it. He was home by 9, the partial record open on his laptop again. He'd been studying it in pieces, learning its edges, preparing for the legal process ahead. He scrolled to the bottom of the page, the section he'd focused on least because it had appeared to be administrative. Secondary parties. Witness listings. Cross-references. I caught a name he hadn't registered before. It was tucked in the lower margin of the filing, in smaller print. A secondary contact listed at the time of the original document. Not a biological parent. Not an adoptive parent. Something labeled originating party, the person who first initiated the filing process. The name was not Elena's. It was not his. It was a woman's name he recognized immediately, because he'd heard it once before, at the wedding, in passing, in a conversation he hadn't fully tracked. Mara. Elena's sister. Damian stared at the name for a long time. He'd assumed Elena was at the center of this. He'd built his entire theory around Elena, her choices, her silence, her protection. But the filing hadn't been started by Elena. It had been started by Mara. A woman he barely knew. A woman no one in this family had mentioned since the wedding. A woman who, as far as he could tell, wasn't at the reception. Wasn't anywhere. Why would Elena's sister be the one to initiate an adoption for his children? The name Mara sat in Damian's mind like a splinter. Small. Buried. Impossible to ignore. He knew Elena had a sister. He'd met her twice during the marriage, quiet, private, the kind of person who stood near walls at parties and smiled politely when introduced. He remembered almost nothing about her. He'd never needed to. She was Elena's family, not his. Background. Furniture. Now her name was on a legal filing that connected directly to his blood. He needed to know who Mara was. And he needed to know it fast. He called Elena's cousin Nina first. Nina was the family's open secret, she knew everything and could be worn down with patience. He kept the question casual. I was thinking about Elena's sister the other day. Mara. Whatever happened to her? A pause. Longer than it should have been. She passed, Nina said. 5 years ago. Damian's hand tightened on the phone. I didn't know that. I'm sorry. It was a hard time for the family. What happened? Another pause. It was sudden. Elena doesn't really talk about it. A shift in tone, careful now. Closing. I probably shouldn't either. You know how she is about Mara. He let it go. He had what he needed, 5 years ago. The same year the boys appeared. The same year Elena vanished from his life without explanation. The same year everything in this story began. He tried 2 more people. Elena's old colleague. A family friend who'd attended both their wedding and, apparently, Mara's funeral. Both gave him versions of the same response, a brief acknowledgement that Mara had died, followed by a swift change of subject. No cause given. No details offered. Doors that opened an inch, then closed. Someone had decided, a long time ago, that Mara's death was not a story to be told. Damian thought about Elena's face at the cafe. Protecting you. I've been protecting you for 5 years. He'd assumed she meant protecting him from the knowledge of the boys. Now he wasn't sure what she'd been protecting him from. He went back to the box of photos. He hadn't finished going through it the first time. He'd stopped when he found the one of Julian and put it face down. He pulled it out now. Julian, laughing at something off camera. The photo was taken at what looked like a dinner party, a house Damian didn't recognize. There were other people at the edges of the frame. He'd looked past them before. He looked at them now. In the background, half turned away from the camera, was a woman. Dark-haired. Slight. She was looking at Julian with an expression Damian recognized immediately, because he'd seen it on Elena's face once, years ago, when she didn't know he was watching. It was the expression of someone completely in love. He looked at the woman's profile for a long time. He pulled up the only photo of Mara he could find, a family group shot from years ago, scanned and shared in an old email chain. He set it next to the dinner party photo. Same dark hair. Same slight build. Same angle to the jaw. Julian and Mara. Together. In a photo that no one had ever shown him, at a dinner party he'd never been told about, with an expression that told him this hadn't been casual. His brother had known Elena's sister. Not in passing. Not as a family connection. Closely. Privately. Secretly. Julian had died 5 years ago. A car accident on a road he drove every week, the kind of accident that gets attributed to weather, to timing, to bad luck. Damian had grieved him the way you grieve sudden loss, completely, then slowly, then as a quiet weight you learn to carry. He'd never questioned it. There was nothing to question. Until now. Julian died 5 years ago. Mara died 5 years ago. The boys appeared 5 years ago. 3 things, the same year, that he had never once placed in the same sentence. He sat back from the desk. His mind was trying to build something, a shape, a theory, but every time it got close, it hit a wall he couldn't see around. He didn't have enough. He was still missing the center. He drove to Elena's house the next morning. Thomas wasn't home. It was just Elena, in the kitchen, and for a moment before she saw him through the glass door, he watched her standing completely still over the counter, not making coffee, not reading anything. Just standing. The way people stand when they're somewhere else entirely. She let him in without a word. He put the dinner party photo on the table between them. Julian in the foreground. Mara in the background, watching him. Elena looked at it for a long time. Her jaw tightened. Then something in her face gave way, not completely, just at the edges, the way a wall cracks before it falls. It was never about you and me, she said quietly. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't an explanation. But it was the first true thing she'd said to him since this started. Then what was it about? He asked. She shook her head. Not refusing. Trying. Before she could find words, a small voice came from the hallway. Mom? Can I have the crackers? Nico. Standing in the doorway in socks, slightly rumpled, holding a book he'd apparently abandoned. He looked at Damian. Then at his mother. Then back at Damian. And then he paused, that pause, tilting his head slightly before saying, You came back. I did, Damian said. Okay. Nico turned and padded back down the hallway. Damian watched the empty doorway for a moment. The pause. That tilt of the head. He'd been telling himself it was familiar in a general way, the way some gestures just remind you of someone. But it was specific. It was exact. He had seen that particular pause, that particular angle, his whole life. He just hadn't let himself know whose it was. He turned back to Elena. She was already watching him. She'd seen his face change. She knew he was getting close. She picked up the photo. Held it. Set it back down. Julian asked me to protect them, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Not from the world. She looked at him. From you. Damian didn't move from the kitchen table. Elena had said the words, Julian asked me to protect them. Not from the world. From you, and then gone completely quiet, like she'd used everything she had just to get them out. She stood with her back to the counter, arms crossed, looking at the floor. Damian sat with those words settling into him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even sure what he was. Just very, very still. I'm not leaving, he said. Not this time. Elena looked up. There was no fight in her face, just exhaustion, and underneath it, something that looked like relief she wasn't ready to feel yet. Damian. No. He kept his voice quiet. Controlled. I've spent 5 years not knowing. I've spent 2 weeks watching you choose silence over and over again. I'm done waiting for the right moment. There isn't going to be a right moment. Just tell me. Before she could answer, Thomas walked in. He'd come through the back door, car keys still in his hand, work jacket still on. He took one look at the two of them and his whole body changed. Not aggressive. Protective. There's a difference, and Damian felt it immediately. What's happening? Thomas said, directing the question to Elena. We're talking, Damian said. You've been talking for 2 weeks. Thomas set his keys on the counter slowly. And every time you come here, she's worse afterward. You understand that? She doesn't sleep. She barely eats. He looked at Damian steadily. Whatever you're looking for, you're not the only person in this room who gets hurt when you find it. The words landed. Damian didn't dismiss them. But he didn't move either. The doorbell broke the standoff. All 3 of them turned. Elena frowned, she wasn't expecting anyone. She went to answer it, and Damian heard the door open, a pause, and then his mother's voice. I called her, his mother said, coming into the kitchen still in her coat, looking at Damian with the tired directness she'd used on him since he was 7 years old. Before you say anything, I called her. Because this needed to happen in a room, not on a phone. Thomas stared. Who is? His mother, Elena said quietly. It's okay. His mother sat down at the table across from Damian. She looked at Elena for a moment, then back at him. She folded her hands. I suspected, she said. No preamble. About Julian. I never had proof. But a mother knows when her son is keeping something the size of a life from her. She paused. The year he died, he was different. Lighter and heavier at the same time. Like someone carrying something they're also grateful for. Damian stared at her. You knew he and Mara? I suspected, she said again. I didn't ask. I should have. She looked at the table. That's something I'll carry. The room was very quiet. Damian turned to Elena. The adoption file. My investigator said it was sealed by court order. He kept his eyes on her. He said Julian requested the seal himself. Before he died. Elena didn't deny it. He was already sick, she said. Her voice had changed, lower, more careful. Like she was picking her way across something fragile. He knew he didn't have long. He was trying to build walls around them before he couldn't anymore. Walls against me. Walls against grief. She finally looked at him directly. Damian, you lost him too. He didn't want you spending the rest of your life looking at those boys and seeing what you'd lost. He thought it would break you. He didn't give me the choice. No, she admitted. He didn't. Thomas put his hand on Elena's shoulder, not interrupting, just steadying. It was a small gesture. Damian noticed it. He noticed that Thomas had stayed in the room instead of forcing the issue, that he was holding Elena up quietly while she went through something he probably only half understood. He thought, this man loves her. And somehow that didn't make anything worse. It just made everything more complicated and more human. Then a small sound came from the hallway. Socked feet on hardwood. Nico, standing in the doorway again, this time without a book, without an excuse. Just standing, the way kids stand when they've been listening longer than anyone realized. He looked at the adults in the room. His grandmother. The man from the wedding. His mother, whose face was doing things Nico probably couldn't name but could definitely feel. He looked at Damian. Are you going to leave too? No one spoke. The question hung in the room, small and enormous at the same time. Nico wasn't asking about today. He was asking the question a 7-year-old asks when he's learned, somehow, that people leave. That adults disappear. That someone who matters can be there one day and gone the next, without explanation, without goodbye. Damian's throat tightened in a way he hadn't expected. Not tonight, he said. Nico considered this. Nodded once. Padded back down the hallway. The room stayed quiet for a long moment after he was gone. His mother looked at Elena. Something passed between them, two women who had both loved people in this story and paid for it. His mother gave a small nod. Elena uncrossed her arms. She walked to the cabinet above the refrigerator, the kind of high shelf you only reach when you mean to, where things are stored because you don't want them in easy reach. She stood on her toes and brought down a small wooden box. The kind with a simple latch. No lock. She set it on the table. Inside, on top of some folded papers, was an envelope. White, slightly yellowed at the edges. Sealed, or it had been once. The seal had been carefully cut, not torn. But the letter inside had never been removed. It was still folded, still untouched, visible at the top of the open flap. Damian looked at Elena. He sent it to me the week before the accident, she said. He asked me not to open it unless it was necessary. She placed her hand flat on the envelope. I never decided it was necessary. I kept deciding there was more to protect than to gain. She slid it across the table toward him. Then she sat down. Folded her hands in her lap. And waited. The envelope sat in front of Damian, his brother's handwriting on the front, his name, in Julian's careful, slightly tilted script. 5 years old. Unopened. Elena slowly lifted the flap and drew out the folded letter, just enough so Damian could take it himself. The letter was 2 pages. Julian's handwriting, careful, slightly tilted, the same hand that had signed birthday cards and scrawled notes and once written Damian's name on a Christmas gift every year of their childhood. Damian unfolded it slowly. The room was completely silent. His mother sat with her hands in her lap. Thomas stood near the doorway. Elena watched the table. Damian read. Julian began with an apology. Not the soft kind, not I'm sorry if this hurts you. The real kind. The kind that knows exactly what it's sorry for and doesn't try to soften the edges. He wrote, I kept this from you because I was ashamed. And I kept it from you because I loved you. Those two things lived in me at the same time and I never found a way to separate them. Damian's eyes moved down the page. Julian and Mara had been together for nearly 2 years. Secret from the beginning, not because either of them wanted it that way, but because Julian had convinced himself the timing was wrong, that Damian and Elena's marriage was already fragile, that introducing a relationship between their two families would create pressure neither couple could handle. He'd told himself he'd find the right moment. He never did. Mara became pregnant. Julian had been terrified and then, quietly, deeply happy, the letter said so plainly. He'd written the word happy and then crossed it out, then written it again. Damian stared at that for a moment. His brother crossing out happiness and then deciding it deserved to be on the page after all. Then the diagnosis came. Julian's illness, moving fast. And Mara, weeks after giving birth to twin boys, had died from complications no one had predicted and no one could have stopped. Julian had been left with 2 newborn sons, a terminal prognosis, and a secret he'd carried alone long enough that he didn't know how to put it down. So he'd called Elena. Damian's hands were very still on the paper. He read the part where Julian described that phone call. How he'd asked Elena, not as a favor, as a desperate, final, falling apart ask, to take the boys. To raise them. To let them grow up inside a family instead of inside a story that would follow them forever. And then the part Damian hadn't expected. Julian had asked Elena not to tell Damian the truth. Not to protect Julian's reputation. Julian was clear about that. I don't deserve protection. I deserve exactly what I earned. He'd asked her to keep the secret because of what he knew about his brother. Because he knew Damian would grieve him differently if he knew. Would look at every memory of their childhood and find the lie inside it. Would spend years wondering what else he hadn't known, who else Julian had really been. You will lose me twice, Julian had written. Once to the accident. And once to this. I can't stop the first one. I am begging you to help me stop the second. Elena had said yes. Damian set the letter down. He didn't speak. He sat with it, all of it, the weight of it pressing down on something inside him that had been braced for the wrong blow. He'd been ready to feel betrayed. He'd spent 2 weeks constructing a version of this story where Elena was the one who'd taken something from him. Where the silence was punishment. But the silence had been a gift. An enormous, exhausting, marriage-destroying gift that Elena had carried alone for 5 years because a dying man had asked her to and she had loved him enough, loved Damian enough, to say yes. He thought about every cold look. Every non-answer. Every careful deflection. He'd read them as cruelty. They'd been the face of someone holding a wall up by sheer force of will, every single day, for 5 years. He thought about the divorce. The way it had ended, not in a fight, not in anger, but in a slow withdrawal he'd never understood. Elena growing quieter. More distant. The light going out of her eyes by degrees until one day she'd told him she needed to leave and he'd had no idea why and she hadn't given him one. He'd spent 5 years believing she'd stopped loving him. She hadn't stopped. She'd been drowning. The pause, Damian said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. He looked at Elena. Nico's pause. Before he speaks. Before he moves. He stopped. That's Julian's. Elena's eyes filled. She nodded once. Damian remembered it suddenly, completely, the way you remember something that was always there. Julian at the dinner table as a kid, stopping mid-sentence, tilting his head slightly before continuing. Their mother teasing him about it. Julian's loading screen, she used to call it. Damian had laughed every time. He looked at his mother. She had one hand pressed flat against her mouth. Her eyes were closed. She'd seen it too. At the reception, in the photo he'd sent. She'd seen Julian's pause on a 7-year-old boy's face and gone completely quiet and invented a neighbor at the door because she hadn't had words for what she was feeling. Nobody had. She sacrificed everything, Damian said. Not to anyone in particular. Just to the room. He wasn't talking about the marriage anymore. He was talking about the years after. Elena, raising 2 boys who weren't hers by birth and weren't Damian's at all, who were the children of her dead sister and his dead brother, a secret that sat at the center of her life every single day. Explaining the boys to a new family. Managing Damian's reappearance at the wedding. Carrying the letter in her coat pocket because she'd never fully been able to put it down. Thomas spoke quietly from the doorway. She never complained about it. Not once. Damian looked at him. He believed it. He looked at Elena. She was watching him with something he recognized now, not the careful blankness he'd been reading as coldness. Fear. She'd been afraid of this moment for 5 years. Afraid of what he'd do with the truth. Afraid of losing control of something Julian had trusted her to protect. I thought you stopped loving me, Damian said. I thought I did something wrong. Or not enough right. I spent 5 years not knowing what I'd done. Elena pressed her lips together. I know. You let me believe that. Yes. Because Julian asked you to. Yes. Her voice broke, just slightly, on the second one. And because I didn't know how to carry both things at the same time. The secret and the marriage. I kept thinking I'd find a way. And then one day I realized the secret had gotten too heavy and I couldn't hold it and pretend to be okay. She looked at her hands. So I let go of the thing I thought you could survive losing. The thing she thought he could survive losing. Him. She'd let him go because she thought he was the strongest part of the equation. Because she thought he'd be okay. He hadn't been okay. Not even close. But she hadn't known that either, because he was a Voss man and Voss men didn't say so. Damian sat with that for a long moment. Then he folded Julian's letter carefully along its original creases and set it on the table between them. The divorce hadn't happened because Elena stopped loving him. It happened because she was drowning alone in a secret too big for one person, and she hadn't known how to ask him to help her carry it. Damian drove home alone. He didn't turn on music. Didn't make any calls. Just drove, hands on the wheel, while the city moved past the windows the way it always did, indifferent, continuous, completely unaware that the entire shape of the last 5 years had just shifted inside one man's chest. He'd gone into that kitchen wanting answers. He hadn't expected the answers to make him the one who owed an apology. He sat in his car in the parking garage for a long time before going inside. He was replaying moments. Not the recent ones, the old ones. The ones he'd filed away under Elena pulling away or Elena choosing silence or, on the worst nights, Elena not loving me enough. There was one memory in particular. He'd come home late from a work trip, exhausted, travel-worn, wanting nothing except his own bed. Elena had been awake. Sitting in the kitchen in the dark, not reading, not on her phone. Just sitting. He'd asked if she was okay. She'd said fine, just tired. He'd believed her, kissed her on the forehead, and gone to bed. He'd been so relieved she was fine. He hadn't asked again. She had, at that point, been quietly carrying the secret of 2 newborn boys, her dead sister, and a dying man's final request, alone, in a marriage she was trying to hold together with both hands while the weight of all of it pulled her under. And he'd kissed her on the forehead and gone to bed. He pressed the back of his head against the seat and closed his eyes. He called Elena the next morning. Not to ask anything. Just to say one sentence. I dismissed your exhaustion as not loving me enough. I've been thinking about that all night. I'm sorry. Silence on her end. Then, quietly, you didn't know. I didn't ask. Another silence. Neither did I, she said. I could have told you. Not everything, but something. I chose not to. I kept choosing not to. She paused. I told myself it was for you. And it was. But it was also because I was scared. Of what? Of what you'd think of Julian. Her voice dropped. He wasn't perfect, Damian. He made choices that hurt people he loved. But you remember him as everything good. And I didn't want to be the one who took that from you. Damian thought about the letter. Julian crossing out the word happy and writing it again. His brother, flawed and frightened and deeply in love with a woman he'd kept secret, crossing out happiness because he wasn't sure he deserved to claim it. You almost told me, Damian said. It wasn't a question. 4 times, Elena said. Maybe 5. Once, I got as far as picking up the phone. I held it for 10 minutes. A small sound, not quite a laugh. Then I thought about your face at Julian's funeral. The way you looked at his photo during the service. Like he was the best person you'd ever known. She exhaled. I couldn't do it. Elena. I know. You carried it alone for 5 years. Yes. That wasn't protecting me. That was punishing yourself. She didn't answer. But he heard her breathing change. He went back 2 days later. He hadn't planned it carefully. He just found himself driving there in the late afternoon, and Elena opened the door without surprise, like she'd half expected it. Thomas was home, in the living room with the boys, and he nodded at Damian, not warmly, not coldly. The nod of a man who had decided to wait and see. Nico and his brother Leo were on the floor surrounded by what appeared to be every single piece of a construction set they owned, which was many. Leo was building something ambitious and structurally unsound. Nico was watching it, very still, waiting to see when it would fall. Damian sat on the edge of the sofa. For a while no one said anything important. Leo's tower fell. He rebuilt it. Nico watched Damian with the quiet, measuring look that Damian now recognized as Julian's, the pause before deciding, the stillness before moving. He'd spent 2 weeks finding that gesture unsettling. Now it just made him want to sit very still and not look away. Then Leo looked up and said, without preamble, "Are you our uncle?" Damian blinked. "What?" Nico said, "Maybe you were. Because you keep coming back." Leo tilted his head. "Are you?" Damian looked at Nico, who shrugged with the mild expression of someone who had simply raised a reasonable question and was now waiting for the adults to sort it out. Damian looked at Elena. She was standing in the doorway, watching him. No answer on her face. No pressure. Just waiting to see what he chose. The question was so simple. So clean. No history in it, no weight, No 5 years of silence and grief and misread cold looks. Just two boys on a floor full of plastic bricks wanting to know what to call him. Yeah, Damian said. I think I am. Leo nodded, satisfied, and went back to rebuilding his tower. Nico studied Damian for another moment, that pause, Julian's pause, and then smiled, small and certain, like he'd already known the answer and had just been waiting for the adult to catch up. He helped clean up the construction set. That was how the afternoon ended, the four of them on the floor, sorting pieces into the box, and Thomas handing pieces from the coffee table without being asked, and Elena sitting cross-legged beside Nico showing him how the connector pieces worked. Ordinary. Almost unbearably ordinary. Damian thought, this is what was buried. Not under betrayal. Under silence. Under two people trying to protect each other by carrying things alone. The family he'd lost 5 years ago hadn't been taken from him. It had been waiting, in a box on a high shelf, in a letter with its seal carefully cut, in the paws of a 7-year-old boy who tilted his head exactly the way his father used to. He was almost at the door when Elena caught up to him. There's one more thing, she said quietly. He turned. The last paragraph of the letter. I didn't read it aloud. She held his gaze. Julian asked me not to. He said it was only for you, if you ever found out the truth. She paused. I've been deciding whether to tell you for 2 days. Tell me. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said the words Julian had written, quietly, carefully, like she was handing him something that had been kept safe for a very long time. Chapter 10, Emotional Payoff. Elena's voice was steady. But her eyes weren't. He wrote, tell Damian I'm sorry. Not for loving Mara. Not for the boys. For making you carry the weight of my choices without ever asking if you were strong enough. Tell him he was always the better man. I just never said it while I had the chance. Damian didn't move. He'd spent 5 years building a story about what went wrong. Every version of that story had a villain. Elena, for leaving. Himself, for not seeing it coming. Now Julian had reached across 5 years and taken that story apart with 2 sentences. There was no villain. Just people who loved each other badly, in silence, at the wrong time. He stood at the window for a long moment. City below. Night above. Julian's words still in his ears. Then he made a decision. The family gathering happened 3 days later. Not a formal thing, no announcement, no prepared speech. Just Damian calling his mother, his sister Camille, his aunt, and saying, come over. I need to say something out loud. They came. They always came when his voice sounded like that. Elena wasn't there. This part wasn't hers to carry. He stood in his mother's living room, the same room where Julian's funeral reception had been 5 years ago, and he told them everything. Julian and Mara. The boys. The letter. The secret Elena had held alone while the whole family quietly blamed her for a divorce she hadn't wanted. The room was very still when he finished. His aunt pressed her hand to her chest. Camille looked at the floor. His mother sat with her hands folded tight in her lap, and Damian watched her face move through something that had no clean name, grief and relief and guilt arriving at the same time. She never said a word, Camille said quietly. Not a question. Not once, Damian said. She protected Julian's memory. She protected the boys. She protected me. He paused. And we spent 5 years thinking the worst of her. Nobody argued with that. Nobody tried to soften it. His mother looked up. Her eyes were wet. Julian's loading screen, she said. Damian nodded. He knew exactly what she meant. Nico's pause. That small tilt before he spoke, before he moved, Julian's habit, worn into a 7-year-old's body without anyone teaching it. The kind of thing that passes from father to son without a single word. She pressed one hand flat against her mouth, the way she had in Elena's kitchen. And this time no one had to pretend they didn't understand why. He drove to Elena's house the next afternoon. Thomas answered the door. He looked at Damian the way he had from the beginning, careful, not hostile. The look of a man protecting something he loved and wasn't sure if the threat had passed. I'm not here to complicate anything, Damian said. I just want 5 minutes with her. And then I want to see the boys. Thomas stepped back and let him in. Elena was in the kitchen. She looked like someone who hadn't slept well and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. She turned when she heard him, and she waited. She was always waiting with him now, never rushing, never assuming. She'd learned that from 5 years of holding too much too quietly. I told my family, Damian said. Everything. Julian. Mara. The boys. What you did. She looked at the counter. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know. He moved closer. But they were blaming you. They've been blaming you for 5 years. And you let them. He stopped. Why didn't you ever defend yourself, Elena? Even a little? She was quiet for a moment. Then, because defending myself meant explaining. And explaining meant telling. And telling meant losing Julian twice. She nodded. Damian stood there with the weight of that. She had chosen to be the villain in everyone's story rather than make Julian the complicated man he actually was. She had handed herself over to 5 years of quiet blame so his memory could stay clean. He didn't deserve that kind of protection, Damian said. But you gave it anyway. He was your brother, she said simply. That was all. No more explanation needed. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't try to rebuild what the years had taken. Some things don't go back, they only go forward. But he looked at her and finally, for the first time, saw her clearly. Not the woman who left. Not the woman who hid things. Just Elena, who had loved his brother enough to say yes to an impossible ask, and paid for it every day since. Thank you, he said. Her jaw tightened. She nodded once, fast, the way you do when you're not going to make it through a longer response. He found the boys in the garden. Leo was chasing something. Nico was sitting on the low wall, watching, doing that thing where he went completely still before deciding whether to join in. Julian's loading screen. Damian sat down beside him. They were quiet together for a moment. Nico didn't ask any questions. He just sat there, comfortable with the silence the way some people are, the way Julian used to be at his age. Damian remembered it now, Saturday mornings, Julian at the kitchen table, not talking, just being there. Present without needing to perform it. He hadn't thought about that memory in years. Leo ran past them both, circled the garden twice, then stopped in front of Damian with the direct, no-nonsense energy that seemed to be entirely his own. Our birthday is in 6 weeks, Leo announced. Yeah? Damian said. We're having a party. With a cake that has 2 layers because there's 2 of us. Leo held up 2 fingers to make sure this was clear. Are you coming? Damian looked at him. Then at Nico, who was watching with that patient, measuring expression, already knowing the answer, just waiting for the adult to say it. 6 weeks ago, Damian had sat alone at the back of a wedding reception, watching a family that didn't feel like his anymore. He'd come to leave without being noticed. He'd stayed because a small boy tilted his head and unlocked something he couldn't name. Now he knew what it was. It was Julian. It had always been Julian, not as a ghost, not as a secret, but as 2 boys who needed an uncle who showed up. Yeah, Damian said. I'll be there. Leo nodded, satisfied, and ran off again. Nico stayed. He looked at Damian for another moment with that quiet, certain expression. Then he tilted his head, just slightly, just to the left, and smiled. I knew you would, he said. Then he jumped off the wall and ran after his brother. Damian sat alone in the garden, watching them go. He thought about a reception hall full of white orchids. A back table. A long drive home through a city that didn't know his name. He thought about Julian writing the word happy, crossing it out, and writing it again. He thought about 5 years of silence that wasn't cruelty. That was love, carried the only way anyone knew how to carry it. The boys' laughter came back across the garden, bright and completely ordinary, with no idea of the weight behind it. Damian stayed until the sun went low. Nobody asked him to leave.